Here you go, child. A little more tea? Be careful now, it's hot. Goodness, just sitting here with you. It takes me right back. My name is Cordelia, though my old friends always called me Cora. I'm 67 years old this year, and I've seen enough in this life to fill a book. You know, this city, Asheville, it's so different today. When I was your age, oh honey, it was just a small town tucked in the mountains where the air was so crisp they called it the Switzerland of the South. A place where rules felt heavier than laws, where a young lady never went out alone after dark, and the pastor's word from the pulpit was the most sacred thing of all. Can you imagine such a life? Everything seemed so clearly mapped out for you. I suppose you're wondering why an old woman is rambling on about the past. What I'm about to tell you, it might sound like something from one of those dramatic novels. But this isn't fiction, my dear. This is a true story. It is my own true story, a secret I have held in my heart for nearly 50 years. It's not just about a love that should have been impossible, but about a single choice made one summer that changed the entire course of my life and of the lives of those who were yet to be born. Now you listen close. If regret could kill, I wouldn't be here to tell this story. What haunted me all these years was a feeling that burned inside me like a hot coal, a love that shouldn't have happened, but did. It was 1978. I had just turned 20. I worked at Mr. Abernathy's fabric shop right on Main Street. It was a good job for a girl my age. My father, Arthur, had a small general store in the lower part of town. We weren't rich, but there was always food on the table. My mother, Martha, took care of the house and us 5 children in total. I was the youngest, the only one still living with them. My sisters were already married. My brothers worked in Charlotte. Our house was on Bluebell Hill, the highest part of Asheville. A simple frame house with a yard where Mama planted kale and chives and raised a few chickens. From the room I shared with my younger sister before she got married, you could see the whole city below, the lights coming on in the early evening like little earthly stars. The routine was always the same. I'd wake up early, help Mama with breakfast, go to the fabric shop, come back for lunch, return to the shop, and at night, I'd either attend church or stay home listening to the radio, sewing, talking with my parents. On Sundays, church service was sacred. No one in our family dared to miss it, not even when it rained heavily or when someone had a slight cold. Papa said that God noticed the absences, and it was better not to risk it. So, it was on Sunday that I wore my best clothes. We didn't have much money for luxuries, but I made the most of what I had. I would wash and iron my floral cotton dress with great care. I brushed my hair 100 times, as I learned in a magazine. I'd put on a light lipstick that I bought secretly at Mr. Henderson's store. That year, a new priest arrived at our parish. The previous one, Father Michael, was over 70 and couldn't handle everything anymore. The new one was the nephew of the Bishop of Knoxville, they said. His name was Father Thomas O'Connell. Young, he must have been in his early 30s. Right away, I noticed he wasn't like the other priests I knew. He didn't have that stern face, that air of someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Father Thomas smiled, talked to everyone from children to the elderly, and he had a voice. Ah, that voice. When he read the gospel at Mass, it made even the non-believers pay attention. His arrival stirred up the town. The devout women commented non-stop, some approving of his modern way of celebrating Mass, others turning up their noses at the changes he proposed. The young people, however, loved him. He started a youth group, organized retreats, played the guitar at Mass. It was like a fresh breeze blowing into our old, dusty church. I remember it as if it were today, the first time our eyes met. It was a Sunday morning. St. Jude's Church, in the town square, was crowded as always. The smell of candles and incense filled the place. The usual devout women occupied the front pews with their rosaries in their wrinkled hands. I arrived late, and my father gave me that look only fathers can give. My mother nudged me lightly as if to say, "Behave." I sat in the pew and lifted my eyes to the altar. Just at the moment when Father Thomas turned to the congregation and delivered the liturgical greeting, and in that exact moment, his eyes met mine. It was as if time stood still for a second, as if suddenly only the two of us existed in that crowded church. I felt a warmth rise to my face, and I quickly lowered my head, pretending to look for something in my purse. Throughout the Mass, I avoided looking directly at him, but I could feel his gaze on me from time to time. It was a strange, new feeling I had never experienced before. Later, when I went to receive communion, he placed the host on my tongue, and our eyes met again. I saw something different there, a spark, a hesitation. I can't quite explain it. I only know that I returned to my seat with my heart beating faster than it should. My mother noticed my red face and asked if I was okay. I lied, saying it was the heat, but it wasn't. It was something being born inside me. Something I should have smothered right then and there, on that Sunday, something that would change my life forever. I started going to church more often. I participated in all the activities, the festivals in Founders Square, the catechism classes, anything that gave me a chance to be near him. Father Thomas always treated me well, politely, but he kept his distance. This only made me want to get closer. The other girls also sighed for him. It was inevitable. A young, handsome, articulate man who spoke about love and compassion with such conviction. But I noticed how his gaze lingered a little longer on me during Mass, how he smiled in a special way when I arrived for the youth group meetings. At the shop where I worked, the customers would talk about the new priest. They'd say it was a waste for a man like that to have joined the church, that he could have married and had beautiful children. I listened to it all in silence, feeling a silly jealousy, as if he belonged to me in some way. During that time, I had a few suitors, young men from town who would invite me for ice cream after service, who would show up at my house to talk to my father. I politely refused, making up excuses. I wasn't in the mood for dating, I'd tell my worried mother. I wanted to focus on my work, help at home. The truth is, none of them interested me. Not after I met Father Thomas. One day, we were setting up for the annual county fair in the parish hall, the one behind the church. The linoleum tile floor was covered with hay and colorful little flags. I had volunteered to help with the decorations. I ended up alone with him in the hall. I was stretching my arm to hang flags, standing on a wobbly wooden stool. Father Thomas warned me about the unstable stool, saying I could fall. Provocatively, I asked if he would catch me if I fell. I saw something different in his eyes for a moment before he looked away and scolded me for joking about serious matters. But I wasn't joking. At that time, I was 20 and thought I knew the world, that I could do whatever I wanted. But the world has a way of teaching you, and sometimes the lesson comes as harsh as the Appalachian sun. Shortly after that day at the fair, I started to notice changes in Father Thomas's behavior. He avoided being alone with me. When he saw me coming, he'd find a way to be with other people. But I wasn't the kind of girl to give up easily. There was something in his eyes, in the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, that told me this wasn't just in my head. The summer fairs passed. July arrived in Asheville. July is a month of celebration. The county fair, as they called it, brought people from all over. Memorial Park was filled with stalls, music, and people from everywhere. My father let me go with my friends, Clara and Beatrice. The three of us were known as the girls from Bluebell Hill, the high part of town where we lived. It was there that I saw Father Thomas walking alone, looking at the craft stalls. He wasn't wearing his clericals, dressed like any ordinary man in pants and a shirt. I told my friends I needed to buy something and that we'd meet later at Mrs. Gable's grits stall. I followed the priest from a distance, seeing how different he looked outside the church, more relaxed, more human. When he entered a less crowded little street near the town's floral clock, I gathered my courage and called his name. He turned, surprised, almost startled to see me. He asked what I was doing there alone, while I commented on never having seen him without his clericals. His response was that sometimes he needed to feel like a regular person. I retorted that he had never been like a regular person to me. We stood in silence. In that dark little street, with the noise of the fair in the background, I felt that something was about to change. He suggested I go back to my friends, stating it wasn't good for me to be seen with him under those circumstances. I questioned him about his fears, whether he was afraid of me or of what he felt. My question caught him by surprise, like a slap. He lowered his eyes and said I didn't understand what I was saying, but I did. Yes, I understood that he also felt something, that I could see it in his eyes. When he tried to back away, I moved forward. I reminded him that he had taken sacred vows, but I asked if God hadn't made our hearts to feel and to love. He tried to explain to me about the different kinds of love, about his vocation, about his duties to God and the church, but his words sounded empty, as if he were trying to convince himself, not me. Then, in an act of courage that to this day I don't know where it came from, I stepped closer and touched his face. His skin was warm, his beard starting to grow, rough under my fingers. He didn't pull away. His eyes were fixed on mine, dark, deep, full of conflict. I called him just Thomas, without the father, for the first time. I said I knew he felt something for me too. And on that warm July night, under the colorful lights of the fair that barely reached us, we did what we shouldn't have done. We kissed, we held each other, we committed a sin that would change everything. His hands held my waist, pulling me against him, my hands tangled in his hair. The world disappeared around us. When we pulled apart, both breathless, I saw tears in his eyes. He asked for forgiveness, from God, from me, but there was no real regret in his voice, only fear. Fear of what we had started. Fear of what might follow. I asked him not to apologize for something so beautiful, stating that it couldn't be a sin. He closed his eyes as if trying to organize his thoughts. When he opened them again, there was a new determination in them. He said we needed to talk, but not there, not at that moment. It was too dangerous. He arranged for us to meet at St. Jude's Old Chapel on the outskirts of the city, a small, almost abandoned church that few people frequented. He said he could go under the excuse of checking the building's condition for renovations. We set a time for the next day. We said goodbye with one last quick, furtive kiss. He went back into the crowd of the fair, becoming Father Thomas again to the rest of the world. I watched him walk away, still feeling the taste of his lips on mine. My whole body vibrated as if it had awakened from a long sleep. That night, lying in my bed, I couldn't sleep. The kiss replayed in my mind like a movie. Thomas's hands on my waist, the warmth of his body, the taste of his mouth. I knew we had crossed a dangerous line. I knew the path ahead would be difficult, but at that moment all that mattered was that he felt the same way, that it wasn't just my imagination, that there was something real between us, something strong enough to make him question his vows. The next day, I made an excuse at home, saying I was going to help Clara organize the books in the parish's small library. My mother didn't ask many questions, but I felt her suspicious gaze follow me to the door. I took a shortcut behind St. Vincent's Hospital and followed the dirt road that led to the old chapel. I arrived before him. The chapel was, as I remembered it, small, simple, with its bell tower where birds now made their nests. The heavy wooden door was locked, but the side windows, without the stained glass they once had, allowed light to enter, creating patterns on the stone floor covered with dry leaves brought by the wind. I sat on a stone bench by the entrance, waiting. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I was nervous, anxious, scared, and at the same time, absolutely certain of what I wanted. Then there were footsteps, and I stood up. Thomas was coming down the path, dressed in his black cassock, which surprised me. I thought he would come in civilian clothes, like at the fair. As he got closer, I saw his serious, worried face. It wasn't the face of a man going to meet the woman he had kissed the day before. It was the face of someone carrying a huge weight. Thomas commented that he had spent the whole night praying, asking God to show him the right path. When I asked if he had shown him, he declared that what happened between us had been a mistake, a moment of weakness that could not be repeated. I was devastated by his words. I questioned how he could call what we had experienced weakness. He didn't know what other name to give it. He mentioned his vows before God, his promise to live in chastity, serving only the church. He said he couldn't break those vows. I reminded him that he had already broken them by kissing me, by telling me we needed to talk as if there were an us to discuss. He insisted it was a mistake that he wouldn't repeat. When I asked why he had asked me to come there then, He admitted that he owed me an explanation, that he needed to ask for forgiveness and make it clear that it couldn't happen again. I challenged him to look me in the eyes and say that he felt nothing, that he didn't think about me, that he didn't dream of me as I dreamed of him. Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were moist, shining with unshed tears. He said that what he felt didn't matter, only what was right. I asked who decided what was right. The church, God, or your heart? He started to say that I was young and beautiful, that I could meet a good young man, get married, have a family. I replied that I didn't want another man. I wanted him. Thomas exclaimed that he was a priest. I retorted that he was a man first, a man who felt, who desired, who loved. I moved forward. Getting so close I could feel the heat of his body, the smell of his skin mixed with the incense that permeated his clothes. I asked him to say, looking me in the eyes, that he didn't love me. After a long moment of staring at each other, just inches apart, something seemed to break inside him. Thomas pulled me into his arms and kissed me again. A desperate kiss, full of repressed passion and fear. His hands held my face as if I were something precious and fragile. Mine clung to his cassock, trying to pull him closer. When we separated, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine and confessed that he couldn't stay away from me, that he had tried, but it was as if I had awakened something inside him that was dormant, something he didn't even know existed. I begged him not to fight it, to stay with me, that we would find a way. He pulled back a little, holding my hands in his. He questioned what way that would be, that he couldn't just leave the priesthood overnight, and even if he could, the scandal would destroy our lives. I suggested we go away, to Charlotte, New York, far from there, to start a new life where no one knew us. He asked about my parents, my family, if I would abandon everything. The question made me pause. Would I really be able to leave everything behind? My parents whom I loved so much, my siblings, my city? I imagined the pain in my mother's eyes, the disappointment on my father's face. Thomas said we needed time to think, to see if what we felt was real or just a passing temptation. I stated that it wasn't passing for me, to which he replied that it wasn't for him either, but we needed to be sure before making any drastic decisions. I agreed, understanding his logic, although my heart wished for immediate solutions. I asked what we would do, and he suggested we meet discreetly to talk, to get to know each other better, to understand what we really wanted. When I suggested we meet at the chapel, he warned that it was risky, that they might notice his frequent visits to a place that was supposed to be abandoned. Then he mentioned the old Thompson distillery on the road to Hendersonville, which had been empty for years and was far from the main road. He proposed we meet there once a week, which seemed too little to me. He smiled, explaining that it had to be that way, at least initially because the more we met, the greater the risk. We agreed to meet on Tuesdays, in the afternoon, when he visited the families on the farms in that region, and no one would find it strange to see him around there. Before we said goodbye, he pulled me in for one more slow, deep kiss, as if he wanted to memorize the taste of my lips for the days we would spend apart. I left the chapel first, checking to see if anyone was around. The way back home was like a dream. Part of me was on cloud 9, ecstatic about what had happened, about the prospect of more meetings. Another part, however, was already beginning to feel the weight of the secret, the fear of discovery, the guilt for doing something I knew would deeply hurt my family. The meetings began as planned. Every Tuesday, I would make up a different excuse. One time it was a Bible study group, another a visit to a sick friend, or helping to organize the parish library. My mother was getting suspicious. I could tell from the glances she gave me when I left, looking too dressed up for such simple tasks, but she never confronted me directly. The old Thompson distillery was perfect for our meetings. The main house was abandoned, with the roof partially collapsed and the walls covered in vines. But there was an annex that had been the administrator's house, still in reasonable condition, with a bedroom, a small living room, and a simple kitchen. It was there that we met throughout that summer, week after week, discovering each other not only physically but also in our souls. We would talk for hours. He told me about his childhood in Knoxville, the son of devout merchants who had always dreamed of having a priest for a son, about how he entered the seminary too young, without really understanding the magnitude of the commitment he was making. about his doubts, his internal struggles, his faith, which despite everything, remained strong. I talked about my family, my dreams of maybe one day studying, of seeing places beyond Asheville. I talked about the expectations that weighed on me as the youngest daughter, to marry and have children like my older sisters, and of course, we made love. At first, it was just kisses, increasingly passionate. Then more daring touches, shy explorations of bodies awakening to new feelings. Thomas always hesitated, torn between desire and guilt. He would whisper that it was a sin while his hands slid under my blouse. I would respond that then God should forgive us, guiding his hands to where I most wanted to feel them. It was on a hot August afternoon that we finally gave ourselves completely to each other. The rain was falling hard outside, creating a curtain of privacy, muffling our sighs and moans. It was painful and awkward, as a first time often is, but also beautiful and transformative. Afterwards, lying on the old mattress we had managed to bring there, he cried. Silent tears that wet my shoulder as I stroked his hair. He murmured that God must hate him at that moment. I replied that God is love, repeating what he himself had preached so many times, questioning how he could hate what we were doing if it was for love. Thomas didn't answer, just held me tighter, as if I were an anchor in the middle of a storm. After that afternoon, a new urgency took over our meetings. It was no longer just desire, but a desperate need to be together, to find a solution to our impasse. Thomas began to talk more seriously about leaving the priesthood. He mentioned the possibility of requesting a leave of absence, a temporary withdrawal, claiming he needed to rethink his vocation. Then, perhaps we could go to Charlotte, where his cousin could help him find work. He had studied philosophy before the seminary. He could teach. When I asked about us, he suggested that after a while, when things settled down, we could get married and have a normal life. How sweet, how impossible those words sounded. I wanted to believe. I wanted to imagine this life together, a simple house, children, waking up next to him every morning without fear, without guilt. I admitted that my parents would never accept it, that for them it would be as if he had seduced me, corrupted me. He agreed that for his parents, it would be as if he had betrayed not only his vocation but their trust, all the sacrifice they made to send him to the seminary. When I asked what we would do, he kissed my forehead and said we would take it one step at a time. First, he needed to talk to the bishop, ask for spiritual guidance, prepare the ground. Then we could plan our departure, maybe to Chicago, far enough away. I agreed, although a voice inside me doubted it would be so simple. Nothing worth having is easy, I repeated to myself. Our love was worth any sacrifice. September arrived, bringing the first autumn colors to the mountains of North Carolina, and with it came the discovery that would change everything. At first, I didn't worry too much about my missed period, as my cycle had never been very regular. Sometimes stress or changes in diet caused delays of a few days. But when 1 week turned into 2, and 2 into 3, I could no longer ignore the possibility that haunted me. I could be pregnant. The signs were there, the constant fatigue from the moment I woke up, the morning sickness I disguised from my mother with excuses of feeling unwell, the tenderness in my breasts I had never felt before. Still, I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, a combination of factors that had nothing to do with a pregnancy. My mother noticed my paleness as I was helping her shuck corn in the yard. She asked if I was eating properly. I lied, saying it was just fatigue from work at the shop, that Mr. Abernathy had increased my hours. She observed me with that motherly gaze that seems to see through lies, also commenting on my frequent outings, questioning if the parish youth group wasn't overwhelming me. I lowered my eyes to my hands and replied that no, it was important to help at the church, mentioning how Father Thomas always said that the youth were the future of the community. As I said his name, I felt my face heat up. Since our conversation about him possibly leaving the priesthood, our meetings had become even more intense, more desperate, as if each moment together could be the last before a major change. My mother murmured, not seeming very convinced, and asked me to be careful, commenting that the priest had eyes that she didn't like. When I asked what she meant, she described them as hungry eyes that looked too much at the young women. She made the sign of the cross, asking God for forgiveness for speaking that way about a man of the cloth, but emphasized that she had her feelings. I remained silent, my heart racing. Was it possible that she suspected something? Did others also notice how Thomas looked at me during Mass, during the pastoral meetings? I replied that she was imagining things, that Father Thomas was just dedicated, concerned about the young people. She shrugged, returning her focus to the corn, but added that I was her youngest daughter, that she had seen a lot in life and only wanted to protect me. That night, lying in my bed, my mother's words echoed in my head. If she knew what she needed to protect me from, it wouldn't be from Father Thomas, but from myself, from my own reckless decisions. And now, it might be too late. The next morning, I gathered my courage and went to Mr. Hayes's pharmacy on the other side of town, where no one knew me well. I bought a remedy that, according to the older women, could make my period start if it was just late. They were bitter herbs that I mixed with honey as directed and took for 3 straight days. Nothing happened, except for a terrible stomachache that made me miss a day of work. The reality was becoming inescapable. I, Cordelia Vance, daughter of Arthur and Martha, a proper girl from Asheville, was pregnant. And the father was the man the whole town looked up to with reverence, the man who guided souls to God, the man who had taken vows of chastity before the Almighty. Our next meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. It was the longest 7 days of my life. I couldn't eat right. I couldn't sleep. At the shop, I dropped an expensive piece of fabric in the mud, which earned me a scolding from Mr. Abernathy. At Sunday Mass, I didn't have the courage to look at Thomas, to receive communion from his hands. He noticed my absence in the line. I saw his eyes searching for me in the crowd, the concern on his face. When the day finally came, I went to the old distillery with a heart as heavy as lead. The afternoon was gray, threatening rain, as if the sky itself shared my somber mood. Thomas was already there when I arrived, sitting on the stone steps of the entrance, his face lighting up when he saw me. He started to say that he had been worried when he didn't see me at Sunday Mass, but the words died on his lips when he saw my expression. He stood up, his joy giving way to concern. He asked what had happened. I entered the house without answering, feeling my legs weak. I sat down in the old chair we had brought into our makeshift living room. He followed me, kneeling in front of me, taking my cold hands in his. He insisted that I speak, saying I was scaring him. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words, but there were no right words for what I had to say, so I just said it, directly, without beating around the bush, that I was expecting a child. His child. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. I saw Thomas's face go through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, fear, and finally, a panic so pure I almost felt sorry for him. He stammered, asking if I was sure. I confirmed that it had been 2 months since my last period, that I had all the signs. He let go of my hands and stood up, staggering backward as if he had been struck. His normally fair skin became almost translucent. For a moment, I thought he was going to faint. He kept repeating, "My God," over and over, running his hands through his hair in a desperate gesture, saying that this couldn't be happening. I felt hot tears streaming down my face. I don't know what I expected. Maybe for him to hug me, to tell me we would be okay, that now we had one more reason to be together. But his reaction, pure terror, hurt me deeply. I spoke, my voice choked with tears, that it wasn't just my fault, that we were in this together. He stopped his frantic movements and looked at me. I saw that he had tears in his eyes too. His voice softened when he said he knew, that he wasn't blaming me. He came closer, kneeling in front of me again, resting his head on my lap. I felt his shoulders shake with restrained sobs. I stroked his hair, feeling a strange role reversal. Now it was me comforting him, me who needed to be strong. I asked what we were going to do. He lifted his face, his eyes red, the tears leaving tracks on his cheeks. He said he didn't know, that this changed everything, that a child. He couldn't finish the sentence. I reminded him of what he had said about leaving the priesthood, about us going to Chicago. He started to say that was before, unable to complete his thought. He added that this was much more serious than just leaving the cassock. It was a scandal that would destroy everything. His reputation, my reputation, the child's life. I asked sarcastically if he was suggesting I simply disappear or give the child up for adoption as soon as it was born. He closed his eyes, as if the words physically hurt him. He said he didn't know, that he needed to think, to pray, to find a less painful path for everyone. I retorted indignantly that there was no painless path in this situation. I questioned what kind of path without suffering he imagined for a single, pregnant girl in a town like Asheville, for a family that would be pointed at on the street, humiliated in church, mocked in the shops. He exclaimed that he knew, that he understood what it meant, the consequences. He said this was the end of everything, of his vocation, of my reputation, of the future we had dreamed of. I insisted that it didn't have to be that way, that we could turn this into a new beginning. It would be difficult, yes. People would talk, they would judge us, but we could face it together, for us, for our child. For a moment, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by that expression I was beginning to hate, that of the pragmatic priest, the man who weighed all the options, who calculated all the risks. He asked for time, saying this was too big to decide at that moment. He needed to think, to find a solution. I questioned how much time, reminding him that we didn't have much, that soon I would start to show, that my mother already suspected something was wrong. He stipulated a few days, a week at most. He mentioned he would talk to someone who might be able to help, an older priest who had been his mentor in the seminary. Holding my face between his hands, he promised he would find a way out, one that would be good for me, for him, for the child. I noticed he couldn't even say, our child, which already told me a lot about the future that awaited us. We said goodbye with a sad kiss, without the usual passion. We agreed to meet in the same place, at the same time, the following week. As I left the distillery, I looked back and saw Thomas on his knees on the dusty floor, his hands clasped in prayer, the very picture of desolation. The week that followed was a blur of anguish and fear. At home, I tried to act normal, but it was getting harder to hide the morning sickness, the fatigue, the subtle changes in my body that attentive eyes like my mother's would soon notice. At work, Mr. Abernathy called me aside after I dropped a pile of fabrics I was organizing for the third time that week. He asked if I was sick or needed time off. I replied no, that I was just a little distracted, and I apologized, promising it wouldn't happen again. He looked at me suspiciously but didn't press the issue. Before I went back to the counter, however, he put a hand on my shoulder and said that if I needed to talk, the door to his house was always open, that Mrs. Abernathy was very fond of me. It was a gesture of kindness that almost made me break down right there. If only it were as simple as talking to my boss and his wife. At church, I avoided crossing paths with Thomas as much as possible. I went to Mass at St. Peter's Parish on the other side of town, under protests from my mother, who didn't understand why I wanted to go so far when we had the main church right nearby. I made up a story about a special novena being held there, which I had promised to attend. Tuesday took an eternity to arrive. When it finally did, I went to the distillery with a slightly lighter heart. The week of reflection must have helped Thomas organize his thoughts, to find a practical solution to our problem. Maybe he had even spoken with the bishop, prepared the ground for his departure from the church. But when I arrived, the distillery was empty. I waited for an hour, then 2, until the sun began to set, painting the sky the color of blood. He didn't show up. I went home confused, scared, feeling betrayed. The next day, I went to the main church, determined to find him. The lady who cleaned the altar told me that Father Thomas had traveled. When I asked where to and when he would be back, she replied that she didn't know for sure, that the Bishop of Knoxville had summoned him urgently, and that Father Michael, the old man who had retired, would be covering the masses for a while. I felt the world spin around me. He had left, without telling me, without giving me an explanation. He had run away from the problem, from me, from our child. That's when I started to hear the whispers. The Bishop of Knoxville had called Father Thomas for a special mission in rural Alabama where there was a shortage of priests. Others said he had asked to go to a monastery in Richmond, Virginia, to go on a spiritual retreat. The devout women of the church vied for who had the most accurate information, who knew the details of the young, beloved priest's sudden departure best. No one, of course, connected his departure to the pale girl from the fabric shop who now carried in her womb the most explosive secret in Asheville. The days that followed were the darkest of my life. Every morning I woke up with the hope that it was all just a nightmare, that Thomas would come back, knock on my door, say he had found a solution, that we would be together. But he didn't come back. No letter, no note. My mother noticed something was wrong. She found me crying several times. She would ask what was happening. I would make up excuses. I had a fight with a friend. I'm tired from work. I read a sad book. She would pretend to believe me, but her eyes said she knew it was something deeper. Meanwhile, my belly, still imperceptible to others, began to gain a firmness that only I noticed. My breasts became heavier. The morning sickness gave no respite. I could no longer deny reality. I was carrying the child of a priest who had fled his responsibility. It was in this moment of despair that I received a letter with no return address, just my name on the envelope. The handwriting, I would recognize it anywhere. Thomas's elegant script, which I had admired so many times on the parish bulletins, on the mass announcements. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside, a brief letter and a wad of cash. The letter simply said, "Cora, forgive me. I didn't have the strength to face this. I am going to a monastery in Richmond for a spiritual retreat for an indefinite time. I have requested a transfer to another diocese afterward. This money is to help you. Seek help, perhaps from your family. I pray for you and the child every day. May God forgive us." There was no signature. It wasn't necessary. Every word was a stab in my heart. He wasn't coming back. He had chosen his clericals over us. He had abandoned me. I tore the letter into tiny pieces, tears blurring my vision. The money, however, I kept. Pride wouldn't fill a child's belly or pay for a midwife when the time came. It was my Aunt Carol who saved me, my mother's younger sister. She lived alone in Boone, a town neighboring Asheville. She was a widow, had no children, and lived in a simple little house. When I was a child, I used to spend my vacations with her. She was a woman of few words, but with a huge heart. I gathered my courage and went to visit her on a Sunday. I couldn't keep this secret alone anymore. I was going to explode. I needed someone to talk to, for advice, someone who wouldn't judge me immediately. And Aunt Carol always had that way of listening without condemning. I told her everything. From the first glance we exchanged in the church to the cowardly letter, I cried as I had never cried before. There, in her simple kitchen, smelling of freshly brewed coffee and cornbread in the oven, she listened to everything in silence, her attentive eyes, her calloused hands holding mine from time to time. When I finished my story, I expected maybe a sermon, maybe disappointment. But Aunt Carol just sighed, ran a hand through her graying hair, and said that I had a heavy cross to bear, but that I didn't have to carry it alone. She would help me. Her plan was simple. I would tell my parents that she was sick and needed help. I would go live with her for a while, until the child was born. Then we would decide what to do. It was a temporary solution, she admitted, but it would give us time to think. I went home with a strange feeling in my chest, a mixture of relief and fear. Relief for having shared my secret, for having a plan, for not being completely alone. Fear for what was to come, for what my parents would say when they found out, for my child's uncertain future. It wasn't hard to convince my parents. Aunt Carol really wasn't in good health. She had rheumatism that bothered her on cold days, as well as high blood pressure. The idea of me going to help her for a while seemed sensible to them. Mama even said it was good for me to learn to take care of a house on my own, that I was of age. So, on a Saturday in October, I left for Boone with 2 suitcases and a heavy heart. Saying goodbye to my parents was painful, not because it would be for long. Boone was less than a 2-hour trip away. I could visit on weekends. But because I knew I was leaving with a lie, and I knew that when I returned, nothing would be the same. Boone was an even smaller town than Asheville. Just a central square, a few cobblestone streets, simple houses, a church. It didn't have the mild climate of Asheville. It was hotter, drier, but it had the advantage that few people knew me there. I could just be another girl helping her sick aunt, without curious glances, without prying questions. Aunt Carol's house was on a side street, away from the center. It was small but cozy. 2 bedrooms, a combined living room and kitchen, a yard with some chickens, cherry and plum trees. The bathroom was outside, a simple but clean attached building. My aunt had prepared the guest room for me, which had once been my late uncle's room, who had passed away more than 10 years ago. It had a single bed, a dressing table, an old wardrobe. On the window, lace curtains she had made herself. "This will be your little corner while you're here," she said, helping me unpack. "If you need anything else, just say so." It was there, in that simple room, in that house with a polished cement floor and whitewashed walls, that I spent the most transformative months of my life. Time in Boone passed slowly. The days dragged on, one the same as the next. I would wake up early, help Aunt Carol with breakfast, then with the household chores. In the afternoon we would sit on the small porch, and I would embroider. My aunt had taught me cross-stitch. She said it was good for calming the mind. She would knit small items for the baby, little jackets, booties, blankets. At night, we would listen to the radio, talk about everything and nothing. Aunt Carol would tell me family stories, from when she and Mama were girls, stories I had never heard before. She spoke of my grandfather, a stern but just man, of my grandmother who died too young from tuberculosis, of how hard it was for the 2 of them to grow up without a mother, with a father who didn't know how to show affection. I would listen, fascinated, seeing my own mother in a new light, understanding her harshness, her constant worry, the fear she had that something bad would happen to her children. Mama had lost her mother very young. She had learned that life could be cruel, that you had to protect yourself. She will suffer a lot when she finds out. I commented one night while we were having herbal tea in the kitchen. She'll think she failed as a mother. Aunt Carol shook her head. Martha has always been very hard on herself. She thinks she can control everything, protect everyone, but life isn't like that. Everyone makes mistakes, everyone falls. The important thing is how we get back up. Do you think she'll ever forgive me? She will. Maybe not right away, maybe not easily, but she will. Blood is blood, and when she sees this baby's little face, it will be impossible not to love. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that my family wouldn't completely reject me, that there would be a way back. Meanwhile, my belly grew, becoming impossible to hide. I no longer went into town for fear of running into someone I knew. Aunt Carol did the shopping, ran my errands. When someone asked about me, she would say I was helping at home, taking care of her. In my 3rd month in Boone, Mama came to visit. It was a tense visit. She looked at me in a strange way, noticing the change in my body even under the loose clothes I wore. She didn't ask anything, but her eyes said it all. She knew, or at least suspected, but wasn't ready to confirm her fears, and I wasn't ready to confess. She stayed for only 1 day and returned to Asheville, taking a basket of fruit from Aunt Carol's yard and leaving behind a heavy silence between us. I cried all night after she left, feeling the chasm that was growing between me and my family. Aunt Carol consoled me as best she could. "Give it time, my child. When the baby is born, it will be easier to talk. Things will work themselves out." I clung to that hope like a castaway to a piece of wood. I had to believe there would be a future for me and my son, even if it was different from what I had dreamed. Of Thomas, no news beyond that letter. I wondered where he was, what he was doing, if he thought of me, if he felt remorse, if he would ever have the courage to meet his son. It was on a rainy May pre-dawn that the pains began, stronger than I had ever felt before. Aunt Carol, experienced, immediately recognized the signs of labor. She called Mrs. Sebastiana, the town's midwife, a 60-year-old woman who had brought half the inhabitants of Boone into the world. Mrs. Sebastiana arrived quickly with her leather satchel and her calloused but gentle hands. She examined me, confirmed that the baby was on its way, and gave precise orders to Aunt Carol to prepare hot water, clean towels, and a boiled pair of scissors. The labor was long and painful. Hours of pain that seemed endless. No anesthesia, no doctor, just an experienced midwife and a loving aunt to help me. With each contraction, each push, I thought of Thomas, of how he had left me alone at this moment, of how I would never forgive him for it. And then, finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the loud, strong, indignant cry of my son arriving in the world, announcing his presence. Mrs. Sebastiana smiled, showing me the small, red, crying bundle. It's a boy, my child, and he's as strong as a bull. They placed the baby in my arms, and at that moment, all the suffering, all the shame, all the sadness seemed to disappear. I looked at that little face, at those eyes that opened shyly, and I felt a love I never imagined possible. A love that surpassed everything, that made everything else seem small, insignificant. Daniel, I whispered, touching his soft cheek. Your name will be Daniel. Like my grandfather, I thought, a strong, hard-working name, a name that didn't carry the weight of the past, that didn't betray his origins. A name that could open paths, not close them. Aunt Carol, by my side, had tears in her eyes. He's beautiful, Cora, and he's yours, all yours. At that moment, I made a decision. Thomas had made his choice by leaving. I would make mine now. I would raise my son alone, with pride, with love. He wouldn't need to know that his father was a man who preferred his vows to his own flesh and blood. He wouldn't need to carry that burden. Daniel would sleep on my chest that night, and on all the others that would follow, and together we would find our way. The first few months with Daniel were the most exhausting and also the most Felicia happiest of my life. Sleepless nights, breastfeeding every few hours, cloth diapers to wash, tiny clothes to iron, but also toothless smiles, the feeling of his warm little body against mine, the certainty that despite everything, I had something precious, something no one could take from me. Aunt Carol was an angel during this period. She took care of Daniel when I needed to rest, taught me the secrets of being a mother that she, even without children, knew from having helped raise so many nieces and nephews. She prepared teas to increase my milk, fortifying soups to help me recover from childbirth. You need to stay strong, she would say. This boy is going to need you a lot. My parents didn't know about the birth. I still didn't have the courage to tell them. I would make up excuses whenever they called or when they wanted to visit. Aunt Carol was worse. She needed constant care. The trip would be tiring for her. The weather was bad for traveling. Anything to postpone the inevitable confrontation. But I knew I couldn't hide Daniel forever, especially since he was growing fast, strong, and healthy, with round cheeks and lively eyes, looking more and more like his father. The same determined chin, the same dark, intense eyes. It was when Daniel turned 4 months old that I gathered my courage. I wrote a letter to my mother, telling her everything. I didn't say who the father was, only that I had made a mistake, that I was sorry, but that I loved my son and wanted to raise him with dignity. I asked for forgiveness for the suffering I was causing, but not for my son. I would never regret him. The response came in person. A week after sending the letter, I heard a knock on the door. It was a hot September afternoon. Daniel was sleeping in the makeshift crib that Aunt Carol had gotten from a neighbor. When I opened the door, there was my mother, alone, pale, with deep dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept in days. We looked at each other for a long moment, speechless. Then she came in, closed the door behind her, and hugged me. A tight, desperate hug that said everything words couldn't. I cried in her arms like a child, sobbing apologies. "Where is he?" she finally asked, her voice choked. I led her to the crib where Daniel slept placidly, unaware of the drama unfolding. My mother looked at him for a long time in silence. Then, with trembling fingers, she touched his soft cheek. "He looks like your brother Peter when he was a baby," she finally said. There was no accusation in her voice, just a deep, resigned sadness. I told her a simplified version of the truth, that I had gotten involved with a young man who had promised marriage but disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy. I didn't mention it was Father Thomas. That truth was too heavy. It would cause a scandal that would splash onto the whole family. My mother didn't insist on knowing the father's identity. Maybe she already suspected. Maybe she preferred not to confirm her suspicions. She stayed with us for 3 days. During that time, she cared for Daniel as only a grandmother could, with a love that surpassed disappointment, shame, and pain. She taught me tricks to calm him when he cried a lot, ways to make him burp better after feeding, how to relieve the colic that sometimes tormented him. Before leaving, she gave me an ultimatum. Your father doesn't know yet. I will tell him in my own way, in my own time, but I can't promise he'll react like me. He's a good man, Cora, but he's old school. He has his pride, his reputation in town. I understood what she didn't say. That maybe my father wouldn't forgive me so easily. That maybe the doors of the house where I grew up would be closed to me for a good while. And what do I do now, Mom? I asked, feeling more lost than ever. Now you raise your son, Cora, with love, with dignity. Show him and the world that one mistake doesn't define who you are. With those words, she left, promising to return soon, promising to send news, money, whatever she could without raising suspicion. I stood at the door watching the bus leave, with Daniel in my arms, feeling simultaneously lighter for having shared my secret with my mother, and heavier with the confirmation that the road ahead would be very difficult. Time passed. Daniel grew, smarter and stronger every day. His first tooth, his first steps, his first words. Each milestone was celebrated with joy by me and Aunt Carol, and sometimes by my mother, who visited when she could, always bringing hidden gifts, new clothes, small toys, money she saved from household expenses. My father, as predicted, did not take the news well. Mama told me he didn't speak for days. Then he had a fit of rage where he broke dishes. Then he fell into a deep sadness. He said he had failed as a father, that I had stained the family name, that people looked at him differently on the street. Give him time. Mama advised, your father is a good man, but proud. It will take time, but one day he will want to meet his grandson. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that eventually I could return to Asheville, introduce Daniel to the extended family, to the community, but I knew it would be difficult. A single mother was a target of gossip, of prejudice. And although my made-up story of a boyfriend who fled his responsibilities was less scandalous than the truth, it would still be a reason for a lot of malicious talk. It was Aunt Carol who suggested a new beginning. She had a friend in Knoxville, Tennessee, Mrs. Peterson, who owned a boarding house for young women. Knoxville was a bigger, busier city, where no one knew me. There I could start over, find a job, raise Daniel without the weight of the past. You can't stay here forever, my child, she said. This house is yours for as long as you need, you know that. But Boone is too small. People are already starting to ask about the boy. Soon the gossip will reach Asheville. It's better for you to go further away, start a new life. Deep down, I knew she was right. It had been over a year since I had left Asheville. Daniel was already 15 months old, walking, starting to say a few words. I couldn't stay hidden forever. I needed to build a future for us. Aunt Carol wrote to Miss Peterson, telling a modified version of my story, that I was a widow, that my husband had died before the child's birth. The story of widowhood was more socially acceptable. It would open more doors. Mrs. Peterson replied promptly, offering a room in the boarding house and the promise to help me find work. Saying goodbye to Aunt Carol was one of the hardest things I've ever done. That simple woman with calloused hands and a huge heart had been more than an aunt. She had been a friend, a counselor, almost a mother in the most difficult months of my life. I promised to write, to send news of Daniel, to visit her whenever possible. I'm going to miss you too, she said with tears in her eyes as she hugged Daniel for the last time. But it's for the best. Go build your life, my child. Be happy. Knoxville welcomed me, with the humid heat of eastern Tennessee, very different from the cool mountain air of Asheville or even Boone. The city was a whirlwind of activity, the famous university, the bustling commerce, the streets full of people from all over. You could get lost in the crowd, be just one more person trying to survive. Exactly what I needed. Mrs. Peterson's boarding house was on a quiet street not far from the center. It was an old, two-story house with thick walls that kept the interior relatively cool even on the hottest days. It had 10 rooms, occupied mainly by young women who worked in commerce or studied. Mine was small but clean, with enough space for a single bed, a crib for Daniel, and a small dresser. Mrs. Peterson was a robust lady in her early 60s, a widow like I supposedly was. She had kind eyes and a practical way of dealing with things. From the beginning, she treated Daniel as if he were her own grandson, spoiling him with homemade cookies, telling him stories, letting him play in the small backyard garden. "Children are a lot of work, but they bring joy to the house," she would say, watching Daniel chase a butterfly. It was she who got me my first job in Knoxville, in a friend's shop that sold clothes. It didn't pay much, but it was enough for the room rent and basic needs. While I worked, Mrs. Peterson looked after Daniel along with her maid, Betty, a kind lady with an easy smile and an even bigger heart. Life in Knoxville was different, anonymous, free from the weight of disapproving looks, of malicious gossip. No one questioned my widow story. No one cared much about my past. I was just another mother struggling to raise her son with dignity. Little by little, I built a routine, made friends, found my place in that noisy, welcoming city. My mother wrote regularly, sending news from Asheville, from the family. My father still hadn't given in, still didn't want to hear about his grandson. But my brothers, especially Peter, the oldest, showed interest in meeting Daniel. One day, Mama wrote, "When the wounds have healed a little, you can bring Daniel to meet the family." I waited for that day, but I didn't pin all my hopes on it. I had learned that life rarely follows the plans we make. Sometimes you have to create new paths, move on, leave behind what you can't change. To supplement my income, I started sewing at night after Daniel was asleep. I had learned the craft from my mother, and my hands were always skilled with a needle and thread. I started by doing small repairs for the other girls in the boarding house, then simple dresses, blouses, skirts. Soon I had a small, loyal clientele who appreciated my careful work, my perfect finishes. Daniel grew strong and healthy, oblivious to the complications surrounding his origin. To him, it was just the two of us against the world, with the support of Mrs. Peterson, Betty, and later, the friendships I made. He was a cheerful, curious, smart boy, as only he could be, and undeniably, every day, more like his father. When he started asking questions about the daddy in heaven, not God, but the father he believed had died, I made up stories. I showed him a photo cut from an old magazine, a good-looking young man who could easily be a father. I told him his father had been a good, hard-working man that God took too soon. It was easier that way. The years passed. Daniel started school, learned to read, showed an aptitude for mathematics. "He has a head for numbers," his teacher would say proudly at school meetings. At 10, he was already helping me with the client's bills, adding up the values, calculating the change, all in his head. By then, we had already left Mrs. Peterson's boarding house. I rented a simple 2-bedroom house near Daniel's school. Sewing had become my main job, more profitable than the shop where I eventually stopped working. I had a loyal clientele, middle-class ladies who appreciated my well-finished dresses, my blouses with delicate embroidery. Life went on, not in the way I had imagined at 20 when I fell in love with the new parish priest, but in a dignified way, a life I had built with my own hands, despite the mistakes and stumbles. Of Thomas, no direct news beyond that letter. Occasionally, through acquaintances who had relatives in Asheville, I would hear fragments of information that he had left the monastery in Richmond after a few years, that he had requested a transfer to the south, to a parish in the interior where no one knew him, that he never set foot in Asheville again. I wondered if he thought of us, if he was curious about the son he never knew, if guilt gnawed at him as much as resentment gnawed at me. But with time, even that lost its importance. Thomas became a distant memory, a youthful mistake, a closed chapter. Daniel was my present, my future, my redemption. When Daniel turned 17, something happened that changed the course of our story again. He came home from school with a paper in his hand. His face lit up with the greatest joy I had ever seen. He had passed the exam to work at the Bank of America. It was a secure, respectable job with a good salary, a huge achievement for a boy from the outskirts raised only by his mother. "Mr. Thompson from the bank says he's never seen anyone with such an ease for numbers," he exclaimed, spinning me around the kitchen in a tight hug. "I start next week, Mom, as an intern, but if I do well, I have a chance to be hired permanently." I hugged my son with tears in my eyes, too proud to express in words. That boy, whom so many would have considered a mistake, a sin, had become a good, honest, hard-working man. He had overcome all the obstacles, all the absences. That night, when Daniel was already asleep, I looked at his high school graduation photo, which I kept framed in the living room. The resemblance to Thomas was undeniable, the same intense eyes, the same determined chin, even the same way of frowning when he was concentrating. For a moment, I felt a pang of pain, thinking about what could have been, about the choices we had to make, about the father Daniel never knew. But that pain no longer had the same intensity as before. I had learned to live with it, to transform it into something softer, more resigned. Thomas had made his choice, and I had made mine. And looking at the result, at the wonderful man our son had become, I couldn't say I regretted it. When Daniel turned 23, he announced he was getting married. The bride, Sarah, was a simple girl, the daughter of merchants he had met at church. Yes, Daniel attended church regularly, something I never forced him to do, but that he chose for himself. Maybe it was something in the blood, I thought ironically. The wedding would be simple, at St. Peter's Parish, with a small reception in the parish hall. Daniel insisted that I invite the whole family from Asheville. "It's time, Mom," he said. "I want to meet my uncles, my cousins. I want my grandparents to see the man I've become, thanks to you." I wrote to my mother, who now visited Knoxville twice a year, always staying at my house without my father knowing. I told her about the wedding, extended the invitation to everyone. The answer came quickly. She would come, yes, and she would bring my brothers and their families, my father. Well, my father still wasn't ready. Even after so many years, the wound of disappointment was still open. It was around this time, with the wedding preparations in full swing, that I started to think seriously about Thomas again. Daniel deserved to know the truth about his origins before starting his own family. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to seek some kind of closure, of peace for this story that had marked our lives so deeply. Finding Thomas was not easy. He was no longer at the Franciscan monastery in Richmond, I discovered through acquaintances. After many discreet inquiries, many letters, many phone calls, I learned that he had left the monastery after a few years, had requested a transfer to Wisconsin, to a parish in the countryside where no one knew him. I gathered my savings, bought a bus ticket the longest trip of my life, and headed north. Daniel thought I was going to visit a distant cousin. I wasn't entirely lying. In a way, I was going to meet someone of his blood. The trip lasted 3 days and 3 nights. America is immense when you cross it by bus. I arrived in La Crosse, Wisconsin, exhausted, with an aching back and a heavy heart. The little city even resembled Asheville a bit, with its hills and its cold climate, but the people spoke differently, dressed differently, ate different things. The parish of St. James was in the center, a large stone church, very different from our colonial church in Asheville. I asked for Father Thomas, and a gentleman directed me to the parish house next to the church. An elderly woman with white hair and a heavy European accent answered the door. It was the housekeeper. She told me the priest was at the afternoon mass and would be back in an hour. I waited on a bench in the square across the street, watching the children play, the old men playing dominoes, life happening without a rush. And then he appeared, descending the church steps. Older, of course, his hair now more gray than black, his face fuller, his walk slower, but it was still him. It was still the man who had turned my life upside down more than 20 years earlier. He didn't recognize me at first. I had changed too. Time passes for everyone. When I approached and called his name, I saw recognition slowly dawn in his eyes, followed by shock, fear, guilt. We went to a quiet cafe away from the square. He could barely look me in the eyes. I ordered a coffee. He didn't want anything. His hands trembled slightly on the table. I told him about Daniel, about how our son had grown up strong and good, about how he was getting married, about how I had never told him the truth. I saw tears in Father Thomas's eyes when I showed him a picture of the young man taken at his bank orientation. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same chin, even the same way of smiling. Thomas confessed that he had never stopped thinking about us, that he prayed for me and his son every night, that the guilt had eaten away at him so much that he had to go as far away as possible, that for years he thought about leaving the cloth, but cowardice always spoke louder. I didn't feel anger towards him, nor resentment. I only felt a deep sadness for what could have been, and wasn't. For the dreams we buried, for the family we never formed, for the years we lost. I asked if he wanted to meet his son. He hesitated, his eyes full of fear and hope. Would it be possible, after so much time? Would Daniel accept? I myself didn't know the answer. I had come without a definite plan, only with the certainty that I needed to close this cycle before it was too late. We agreed that he would come to Knoxville the following month, after Easter. Enough time for me to prepare Daniel, to tell him the truth I had hidden his whole life. I returned home with a lighter heart. The truth, they say, sets you free. And after so many years carrying the weight of the secret, I finally felt that I could be free. But fate has its own plans. A week after returning to Knoxville, I received a telegram. Father Thomas had passed away. A massive heart attack while celebrating Mass. He died at the altar, consecrating the bread and wine. Maybe it was God's way of forgiving him, of calling him back while he was practicing the priesthood he never abandoned. I didn't go to the funeral. I couldn't leave Daniel, couldn't raise suspicion. I cried alone in the privacy of my room for the man I loved, for the father of my son, for the sinner who, like me, never found complete redemption. Daniel never knew the truth. I didn't have the courage to tell him after Thomas died. What good would it do to shake the image he had of his deceased father, to tarnish the memory of a man who could no longer defend himself? I decided that some secrets are best kept forever. My son got married, had his own children, built a solid life. He is a good, honest, hard-working man. Sometimes I see traces of Thomas in him, a gesture, an expression, a way of frowning when he's concentrating, and in those moments I feel a mixture of pain and gratitude. Pain for what we lost, gratitude for what we gained. Time passed, and the pain diminished. Asheville was left in the past, like a city in a distant country I visited in my youth. Father Thomas became a yellowed photograph, kept at the bottom of a drawer, along with other memories that only I understand. And Daniel. Daniel became my pride, my redemption, my way of making peace with the past. In him, I see the best of me and the best of Thomas. In him, I see that even from the gravest mistakes, unexpected blessings can arise. If I could go back in time, would I have done things differently? I can't say. The young Cora of 20, in love with the new parish priest, seems like a stranger to me now. Her choices, her desires, her dreams belong to another life. Today, looking back with the serenity that only age brings, I understand that every choice we make traces a path that cannot be undone. My path brought me here, an old woman with white hair, with a good son and wonderful grandchildren, a simple but honest life, and a secret that I will take with me to the grave. And you, where are you listening to this story from? Tell me in the comments. I love to know how far my words can reach.